Hi everyone, it's Amy here from the blog I Think Therefore I Teach. Welcome to your next criminology video. This is for the first topic of Unit 3, started in your second year. So let's get started. This one, don't forget, will be a controlled assessment once more. So you will need to fill out your notes and sheets as you do ready for your exam. And this one is crime scene to courtroom. So the first thing I got my students to do was to list as many jobs as they could think of that linked to crime scene to courtroom. So everything from a body has been found, for example, all the way through to convicting somebody in court. What are all the jobs that are involved from the first starting point to the end? And these were some of the ideas that my students presented. And these are all ideas that we are going to look through on this PowerPoint. So, number one, the police officers and detectives. Often the first personnel on the scene, they're the first people you often call them and the ambulance. The first role is to preserve life. This might mean looking after casualties, calling an ambulance. This might also mean ensuring the safety of the scene and those around. And then their second role is to ensure evidence on the scene is undisturbed and uncontaminated. So the first port of call is to help the individual at hand. It is then to preserve everything, keep people back, barrier it off, so make sure that nothing is contaminated. This is the golden hour. This is the period immediately after the crime has been found. The police must act swiftly to secure scene and preserve evidence. Important time to take witness or victim statements. And again, we discussed why is it so important to do it swiftly. And obviously, what we discussed was the ideas that you don't want anything to change, you don't want anything to be lost, you don't want the perpetrator to potentially get away. So it's extremely important. You know, you don't want people that have seen it to then walk off. So everything really has to be done within that first hour. There are a number of different units within the police office and detectives. So you have a specialist police officer units. These include traffic mounted police, so ones on horses, air support, underwater, dog handling. So for example, in the James Bulger case, they were looking in all of the lakes and things, so that was an underwater search. Air support, because obviously air support can see an awful lot more than what we can see on foot on ground, so they can become very useful. If someone's left in a car, then the traffic police can really help to find that car and follow them. Police detectives are the personnel who lead an investigation. They're the organisers. Usually involves serious crimes. Can sometimes belong to a specialist department, including the CID, Criminal Investigation Department, fraud, drugs, firearms, child protection, any special branches as well. My class and I discussed which area they would find interesting. For us as outsiders, you would be thinking, you know, which is the really good ones, which is the areas, and which ones are just like a lot of paperwork. Maybe they're all lots of paperwork, maybe they're all really exciting. We don't know as outsiders, really, do we? I then got my students to research one of the specialist police roles on the previous slide and research it. I wanted them to consider the value of this role and how it contributes to the role of police in criminal investigations. So what is their role and why? What is their benefit? What is the benefit to them? And so again, they've got the list of areas that they could look into with a few more. And then we watch the YouTube clip at the bottom. Evaluation then of their effectiveness, the strengths and the limitations. They do have a crucial role. They preserve life, they keep people safe. It's vital for preserving evidence and bringing the right people to justice. And they are skilled, trained professionals, sometimes with specialist skills. The limitations, however, the McPherson report in 1999 showed that Metropolitan Police in London were institutionally racist. This came about after the Stephen Lawrence case. Sometimes the police make mistakes which cost lives, such as the Hillsborough Stadium disaster. Sometimes police do not secure crime scenes properly, and the police have been criticised for not investigating some crimes effectively, such as domestic abuse and hate crimes. So this is where knowing your different case studies is really, really helpful. Knowing about the Stephen Lawrence case, knowing about the Hillsborough Stadium disaster, because you can bring all of these into where limitations and strengths are. We also looked into the cost, so the evaluation of the effectiveness, the salary of a police officer between 20 to 40 per year as an officer. This is relatively low, so don't forget this is an evaluation topic. You need to be able to evaluate these areas, and so obviously the statements I put on this PowerPoint slide often aren't evaluative. You have to use the information to formulate your own evaluation. So you need to talk about their effectiveness towards a crime investigation. So if they're not getting paid very much, why might that be a bad thing? Why might that be a good thing? So think about these areas and then add in your own evaluation to them. The availability, the number of police officers in England and Wales fell by 20,600 between 2010 and 2019. That's a 14% decline. This was due to government policy of austerity after the financial crash in 2008-2009, so the recession. So it was to save the spending of public's money. Austerity is cutbacks, basically. So again, what is the consequences of this? What is the consequence of losing that many trained police officers? What is the consequences for society? What's the consequences of the team that are left? The government have recently committed to recruiting 20,000 more officers. So now they have the budget again, they're recruiting once more. What are your thoughts on that? Expertise. The police are trained to a good standard in England and Wales, usually hold a degree or follow an apprenticeship route. Lots of on-job training and mentoring. Their skills are broad and general. They need to know first aid, how to ensure safety and how to secure crime scenes. But they also need excellent people skills in order to police by consent. This means encouraging people to be law-abiding and get them on side. So the last 2 points there are kind of twofold. The first is that they have to set an example. So they have to be law-abiding themselves. They have to set an example of how they wish people to behave. But they also have to be able to talk to people. Often police officers come in pairs now, so that they can, work off each other's strengths. But they need to be able to talk to people, approach people. If you're frightened of a police officer, you're not going to open up to them. So they need to be approachable in order to be able to get all the information out of the people they need. Some may specialise and become experts in certain fields. So there's a lot of promotional opportunities. So my students then started to fill out their grid sheets, and in the case section they can include details of the role of the police in the Stephen Lawrence murder investigation. So we watched a documentary on the Stephen Lawrence investigation. I highly, highly recommend it. It is of extreme importance for you to be able to understand how these cases and how people have actually reacted in real life situations. So in the Stephen Lawrence case, the murder of Stephen Lawrence, the police, initially there's many drawbacks to how the police responded to the crime. Stephen Lawrence was a young black boy, and his friend Dwayne was also a black boy, and when Dwayne rang up for an ambulance because his friend had been stabbed, they sent the police first, then the ambulance arrived, and the police basically interrogated Dwayne. There was racial profiling done. They thought that he must be in some way guilty as well, rather than trying to find the men, the thugs that had done it, the gang that had done it, who were all on foot. So if the police responded quicker and better and listened to Dwayne, they could have maybe caught them rather than weeks and weeks and weeks of investigation into it. There's many parts of the Stephen Lawrence case where things went wrong, where they were working on an old system of paperwork and a new system of computers, so things got missed, left, neglected. There was no connections made between the different bits of evidence. And also, for example, Dwayne said that they went in one direction, the police then went in the opposite direction. So do watch the Stephen Lawrence case. There's lots on YouTube because it's a very, very good example that you can use. Right, CSIs. This is why you all pick criminology. Crime scene investigators. Civilians employed by the police forces, so the scene of crime officers, so I called them SOCOs, but SOCOs. These are civilians employed by the police force. Now, don't be deceived by the word civilians. We don't just mean lay people off the street. Oh, you can come and be a SOCO. No, it's not like that at all. These are people that will still have some sort of training, background. They maybe are retired people within fields of relevance, ex-military, things like that. Main responsibility is to collect and preserve physical evidence across a wide range of crime scenes, post-mortems and accidents. Evidence must be kept uncontaminated or it will be admissible in court. The example we looked at as a class for this one, and we'll bring it in later, is the Meredith Kircher murder and Amanda Knox, and how they collected the materials, but there was again a number of issues with how the materials were collected, and then they were dismissed in court because of that. So collecting the evidence correctly is so important. What do CSIs do? They take charge of evidence collection, they liaise with police officers to decide what needs collecting, they photograph the crime scene, objects, people, tyre marks, shoe prints, injuries. So these might be areas that the police have spotted. There's some tyre prints over there, there's some footprints there, there's something over there. The police then don't do anything, they just cordon it off and protect it. It's the CSIs that come in then and do the actual gathering of the information. They take fingerprints, collect gunshot residue, they collect fibres, hairs, bodily fluids, or anything that might have DNA, cigarette ends, anything like that. They may have to work shifts and sometimes be called out of crime scenes in the middle of the night because obviously time is of the essence. Evidence has to be handled and bagged correctly, stored and documented. CSIs may also attend post-mortems if there is a suspicious death. So if somebody has died suspiciously and they're having a post-mortem done, they may then go to the post-mortem. May be called to give evidence in court as well. So can you suggest any precautions that they might take in order to preserve things properly? What are they actually doing to preserve it properly? The cost then, salaries between 16,000 to 24,000, more experienced 24 to 35, managers about 40. The average UK salary is about 30,000. So you're talking about above average salary for the general population, but still you're not talking about excessively high there for the amount of training, the amount of pressure that they will have. Most police forces do employ only a dozen CSIs. 1,300 are employed by the government and the largest private provider is 500. So we're not talking about a lot here. So there are not many jobs in this profession. This means the roles are highly competitive. So a lot of people want to be CSI investigators. No, CS investigators. So a lot of people want to do this job, but it's extremely competitive to get in. But what does that mean for the people that have the jobs? And does that make them work more efficiently, more effectively? Does that mean that they are the best in the business? Things like that. So again, think evaluatively. Expertise. CSIs have very extensive training in handling evidence correctly. Most will have a degree in science, such as chemistry, biology or forensic science, sometimes criminology or psychology degrees, and the police forces often run their own training courses for CSIs. So again, do any of these statements reflect the effectiveness of the CSIs, positively and negatively? So that's what you need to explore. How do these areas affect the effectiveness of how they do their jobs? So these are only the starting statements. You then need to say this shows, this means, this implies to get your evaluation in there. Strengths and weaknesses. The strengths of CSIs, they are highly trained, they are crucial in collecting and preserving evidence. Their job may be hazardous, so they're working with dangerous substances, but this is taken into their training and they are equipped for it. Their role has to be meticulous. One mistake could mean guilty person goes free. The role can be emotionally difficult when attending accidents or violence. So obviously what you're going to see can be very, very upsetting. You're going to often murder crimes, rape scenes. So these are very, very difficult. Probably most of the time it will be murder that the CSIs would go to. So this can be extremely traumatic experiences and they need to be able to work through that. We then looked at the Amanda Knox documentary and how this was handled. Again, I highly recommend it just because the documentary is just brilliant. But it really, again, is absolutely shocking what happened and how Amanda Knox eventually did get off with the potential murder of Meredith Kercher. I'm very biased when it came to watching this one. Maybe have a watch and let me know underneath in the comments what you think. Was Amanda Knox guilty or not guilty? But when it comes to this topic, one of the big areas is Meredith Kercher's bra strap that had DNA of somebody else underneath the hooks was found, I think, about 3 months later. The CSI missed it originally. They found the bra, they didn't connect that something was missing from the bra, but then they did not find it. And so because there was such a massive gap in time, it was dismissible in court. So do have a look how the CSI may have made mistakes and what could have been better within this case in order to make the evidence more concrete. And again, my students use that one on their grid sheets. Number 3, forensic scientists and specialists. So, forensic scientists. Forensic science means using scientific techniques and knowledge and applying them to crime scenes, such as bodily fluids, might be analysed for presence of DNA, which could then be compared to a suspect. We then watched a couple of clips here, one for forensic odontology. Odontology. I'm not very good with these words. I've definitely missed my calling in life. That's to do with teeth, how you link teeth to people. So this is very, very interesting. It's a very interesting area, is this one, because obviously teeth again are quite unique. You have medical records for your teeth. You can tell a lot about someone's teeth, such as their age, the wear on the teeth, etc. You can tell about their background, their diet, things like that. So teeth are a really, really good a good sign. I told my students, it's quite a macabre thing really to mention, but police always say that if you are ever attacked, God forbid, if you ever attacked, either scratch the perpetrator so hard that their DNA then goes under your fingernails, or bite them really hard so that your teeth go into scar wherever it is that you can bite. So because your teeth can be then linked to that person, your DNA under their nails can be linked to that person. So just a side note there for safety. We then looked at forensic, here we go, entomology. There we go, that's better. Entomology, and that's bugs. Now, we watched that clip. I think I lasted about 1 minute and 20 seconds because when when one slide pops up calling the smell of death, yeah, we're stopping there. But this is basically the bugs that eat dead bodies, and you can tell how long a body's been dead by the size of the maggots, the decomposition, etc. So that one is a little bit grim, but the person in that clip who loves bugs and is passionate about bugs, it is a good clip to watch. Forensic specialists. These specialists are forensic scientists but focus on particular areas such as toxicology. Toxicology is poisons, toxins, fires and computing. For example, a forensic anthropologist are specialists who analyse bones. What can you tell from bones? So I discussed this with my class, and you can tell an awful lot from bones. You can tell again age, you can tell sex by if you have the pelvis, for example. So you can tell, because a woman and a man's pelvis are very, very different. Obviously women have to give birth, so you can tell the size of them. You can, so even if you only have partial bones, you can tell the size of someone, give or take, by the length of kind of like an arm or a leg or something like that. So bones can tell you an awful lot. And then I gave my students the opportunity to research one of the following in a little bit more detail. And again, have a look at the effectiveness of their role in criminal investigations. That's what you need to look at. How useful are they? The cost is about 20,000 up to 45 at senior levels. 43 police forces across the country employ their own in-house forensic scientists in labs for fingerprinting and other basic scene of crime analysis. Other forensic work used to be provided by the government, which was owned by the Forensic Science Service, but this was closed in 2012, probably austerity cuts as well in that case. There are now privately owned labs as well. Police have control over the budget. However, budgets have been cut. Spending on forensic services has been cut by 50% in 2008, according to the report of the House of Lords in 2019. So this, you can get a lot of evaluation from that. If they've gone from being a separate, unbiased organisation to in-house with police stations, to then police having control over their budgets. So are they going to give them the money that they need? And then for the budgets to then have been cut 50% for the forensic team, what does that mean for how effective and efficient they can do their jobs? 80% of forensics are carried out in police labs to save money. This might lead to cognitive bias. The police are trying to find and charge a suspect. Can the scientists working for them really be unbiased and objective? So they'll have lunch with the police officers. They'll hear about the cases going on. They will have some potential bias there in what they're looking for. If they were a complete separate lab, they just got the materials, then they would look at them unbiasedly. Whereas when you're actually looking at them in-house, you sort of know what's going on in the case. A US report in 2009 said forensics should be kept independent of the police to avoid bias. The police are selecting fewer items to go for forensic analysis in order to save money. But those cuts, does that mean that things are missed? This might lead to evidence being missed, and there might be a risk of miscarriages of justice. How do they know what evidence is going to be of value or not? Finally, police labs are not put through the same accreditation process, so might not be as good quality or as competent. So when they were a separate organisation, then they were vetted very, very competently. That's not happening as much within police stations and police labs. Further evaluation then. There is only about 3,400 forensic scientists in the UK. Across the UK, that's a very, very small number. But there are enough to fill the roles available. The bigger problem is the funding. Very highly trained degree and beyond. Their services can be crucial in criminal investigations, can provide concrete evidence of someone's guilt or innocence. Expertise can help with very complex or cold cases. Sorry, I'll just go back to that one. So the expertise, so when a case has died, and when a case is a cold case and there's no new information, no connections, no links, they can really help with that. They helped within the Stephen Lawrence case when they went back and looked at the jumpers that had been kept from the suspected attackers, and they actually found microscopic spatters of Stephen Lawrence's blood, and that's what eventually help with the conviction. So they can help with cases that are classed as cold, where there's no new evidence and they don't know where to take it, and so they can actually now, especially with the technology they have, find new information. The limitations, they are expensive. Human error, anything that involves human beings can mean that mistakes are made, miscarriages of justice therefore happen. And forensic experts, the prosecution and the defence may contradict each other. So think back to the Amanda Knox, Meredith Kircher murder. One side would say that some blood found on the knife could be used and was enough to show that it was Meredith Kircher's blood. The other side said the blood is so microscopic you can never link it to anybody. So sometimes the forensics are used in different ways by the prosecution and the defence. My students then looked at the Adam Scott case. This one was to show how he was falsely accused of rape and how DNA was mixed up in the lab. So this was where you can get, again, some more drawbacks. You can use this as a specific example where it doesn't always work, and it was actually mixed up by the forensics team. And again, my students used Adam Scott as their example and continued with their grid sheets. Forensic pathologists, number 4. Their role, pathologists are medical doctors. They are specialised in detecting the cause of death by examining the dead body, so post-mortem or autopsy. They may investigate cause of death in lots of situations that are not criminal investigations, but where the reason of death is not clear. So it might not just be, it's very obvious this person has been murdered. It might be, this is very unusual circumstances, what's happened here. But their services can be called on by the police if a death is suspicious. So how do they work? Firstly, they study the external body. They look over the whole body to see if they can see anything that they think stands out that looks odd or shouldn't be there. If necessary, they may conduct internal examinations, because obviously that will then show things like poisons, etc. Samples will then be sent for forensic analysis. They may also advise the police on how to recover a body. So, for example, if a body is found in like a swamp or something very, not that we have swamps really in England, but if they found a body in a very unusual place, they might then help the team to get them out and preserve them as much as they can. This sounds, and me and my class looked into this in quite a lot more detail of how to become a pathologist, and it is probably one of the most highly trained jobs out there. It's up there with surgeons, so not many doctors go on to study pathology further, but you're looking at between 10 and 12 years of study to become a pathologist, so extremely, extremely highly trained. In a criminal investigation, another pathologist appointed by the defence may also examine the body. This is so that independent evidence can be brought to court. Pathologists write a report following their examinations. This is then passed to a coroner. A coroner looks into deaths for unnatural or unknown causes, or those that have happened suddenly or in prison or police custody. As a coroner, you could be deciding the cause of death by analysing all the available information. So a coroner puts all the pieces together, basically. It also serves as so back to the pathologists, it also serves as an expert witness statement for the police, so their examination report can be used in court, and sometimes they're even called to give evidence themselves. Forensic pathology in England and Wales, the Home Office registered forensic pathologists work within 6 regional group practices. These are independent of the police, coroners and the Home Office, so they're an independent organisation. This ensures objectivity and lack of bias. So why defence teams do their own pathologist, I'm not sure, but obviously people still believe that there may be things missed. Group practices are currently structured so that pathologists working within them may be self-employed or employed by a university hospital or a hospital trust. So what's the effectiveness of their role? The strengths are they are very, very highly trained, as I've said, one of the highest levels that you can actually get educationally. They study medicine and then another 4+ years for a specialist study. Can be very helpful in determining the time, cause and manner of death. This can help immeasurably in finding the culprit in criminal investigations. However, highly paid. They're paid between 80 to 110,000, so they're very expensive. They deserve the wages they get, but then it's an expense to hire them. 35 to 40 Home Office registered pathologists. This is enough, but there are concerns about future numbers with fewer opting to specialise, so not as many doctors are going into pathology. So think as well, 35 to 40, we're talking about across England here. So if somebody was murdered, so for example me here in Scarborough, probably the nearest one would be either York or Leeds, so they would have to take the body to wherever the nearest pathology lab was. Expertise, human error can always mean mistakes are sometimes made, and this leads to miscarriages of justice. We looked then into the Sally Clark case, where she was convicted of murdering her 2 baby sons. Very, very sad case, well worth a watch. There's not as much on YouTube for this one, so you might want to just do some general research. And Alan Williams was the pathologist in this case, and what happened was the 2 baby sons were two completely separate situations. Her first son died something like 12 weeks, I think it was, or 8 weeks. One of them was 12, one of them was 8. And they put it down to cot death. But then when her second baby died, they looked again into it and actually thought she's murdering her children. And because of bad statistics, where someone said the chances of cot death happening twice is like 73 in a million or something like that, or no, 1 in 73 million, that's right. The chance of this happening is so small, but actually because one baby dies of cot death genetically, because they have the same genetic material, there's actually a very big likelihood that another baby might die of a cot death, but that again wasn't considered. But it was the role of the pathologist. The pathologist did not give all the information found. So in the second baby there was, I think, about 8 points or something like that of infection in its little body, and he never actually declared that. That infection could have then led to the cot death. So she was eventually released after serving time in prison for the murder of her two sons, was found not guilty. But Alan Williams, who was the pathologist, made a number of mistakes, so check that case out as your example. Finally, the Crown Prosecution Service, or the CPS. This is made up of solicitors, barristers and support staff. It's a separate independent organisation to the police. They are specialists in deciding if a case should be brought to court. The police refers cases with files of evidence that they have collected to the CPS, who then decide if the evidence is strong enough to proceed to court. The CPS is a service they provide which is on-call 24-hour legal advice to the police. So that immediately is an extremely big strength of this, in that they have a 24-hour-a-day call line for support. So the CPS are very much the paperwork people at the end. They're the people that take it to court, the people that look at the evidence and put every bit together. They're there to assist the police with expertise, but they're also there to ensure the taxpayers' money is spent wisely on cases with a good prospect of conviction. We'll come back to that shortly. The CPS apply tests to see if there is enough evidence. What's classed as enough evidence, though, I'm not sure. They'll have certain categories and criteria, and I'm sure that they meet. If there is enough, they prepare the legal case for prosecution. They pass anything necessary to the defence before the hearing, and they employ their own Crown prosecutors, the barristers who go to court. They employ about 2,000 lawyers and deal with about 500,000 cases per year. So we're talking about a massive job role here. This is where there is a lot of jobs and a lot of need for those jobs. But they look at the evidence. If there's enough evidence, then they proceed with defence and prosecution. The strengths then of the CPS, the availability, they do, as I've said, have that 24-hour call line, so that means that they can always find support they need when doing criminal investigations. It's a national organisation, so it applies consistency in how prosecutions are handled. So there's just one organisation that deals with them all. There's not lots of different ones that therefore could mean there's bias. No, there's just one centralised unit. Expertise. This is shared with the police. The staff are highly qualified in legal matters, and it also saves money. Why? Because in 1986, the CPS was set up. Before then, the police made the decisions. And what happened was they weren't always very objective. They didn't always have all the evidence. So it cost a lot of money to take things to court. And so a lot of cases were going to court. They had no evidence, that were immediately dismissed, but that still cost the taxpayers a lot of money. One of my students asked, why does it cost so much money? Because you've got so many jobs that are involved to get it to that point, and all of these people need paying. The limitations, though, the availability of the CPS funding has been cut due to austerity again over the last 11 years, underfunded, understaffed. This means they can only afford to take certain cases to court. This means lack of justice for some victims. CPS has also been accused of not taking domestic violence or rape cases to court because they're difficult to prove. And we know this from Unit 1 when we looked at these areas, but it is very, very hard, because unless you have immediate, within that golden hour evidence, it's very, very hard to convict for these cases. Human error also means mistakes are made. Finally, we started to watch in my class until we got the call to say we needed to close. We started to watch the Damilola Taylor case and how the CPS were involved in this. Now, the clip there wasn't really obvious as to how the CPS made the mistakes with Damilola's case. But what you need to look out for is how were witnesses dealt with? How was the evidence dealt with? Because that's all the CPS. And so why did this case take 6 years to be resolved, 3 trials, and it cost 16 million in total? The questions are why, and the answers are with the mistakes the CPS made. So please do check that one out. Either watch the clip or do a bit of research, because that's a fantastic example for you to use. Finally, I got my students to research another area on their own, the Serious and Organised Crime Agency, the HM Revenue and Customs, the Border Force, and again looked into cost, availability and expertise, and then they got to finish their grid sheets. Do not forget that bit in red at the bottom, number 2. You have to talk about how the different parts of their role affect how effective they are within the criminal investigations. That's where you get your marks in your controlled assessment. Otherwise, folks, thank you very, very much for watching. This one's been quite a long one, so hopefully you found this useful as a summary. Please give me a thumbs up if you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe so that you're always kept in the loop and up to date with all the latest video releases. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye for now.